Snow swirled in endless spirals, pulled by a wind that howled like something ancient and hungry. Agent Morris pressed his gloved hand against his headset, trying to block the noise as command repeated the instructions. Confirm status of Outpost Theta 19. No communication for 12 hours. Assume worst-case scenario. Over. Morris glanced at his partner, Hughes, who was hunched forward against the wind. Worst-case scenario? Hughes asked, voice muffled by his mask. You know what they mean, Morris muttered. The outpost loomed ahead, a squat rectangle of steel half buried under snowdrifts. The floodlights were dead, only the dim red glow of the emergency beacon pulsed through the storm. They trudged up to the reinforced entry doors, their boots crunching on ice. Morris swiped his clearance card. The lock clicked, then groaned open. The smell hit them first, cold metal, antiseptic, and something coppery underneath. Inside, their flashlights cut through darkness to reveal the reception area, overturned chairs, scattered papers, a broken coffee machine leaking brown sludge across the floor. Looks like a riot, Hughes said, his voice tight. No, Morris replied, sweeping his light toward the hallway. Riots don't leave blood streaks that long. The streaks, dark, nearly frozen, ran along the wall and floor, trailing deeper into the facility. Somewhere far down the hall, a door slammed shut. Hughes flicked the safety off his rifle. You heard that, right? Morris nodded, sweeping his flashlight beam toward the far corridor. The light caught on something metallic, an access card, half buried in a patch of snow that had drifted in under a warped ventilation grate. Beside it, a boot lay on its side, the sole worn smooth from years of service. The boot was still laced, but there was no foot inside. Hughes swallowed hard. Christ. They followed the blood trail. It was smeared in long, uneven streaks, sometimes broken, as if the victim had been lifted, then dropped again. Scratches clawed into the wall at shoulder height, deep enough to expose the steel beneath the paint. At the intersection ahead, Morris stopped. His flashlight beam danced over 3 parallel grooves in the floor, as if something heavy had been dragged with inhuman strength. The grooves led straight toward the security hub. Body disposal team's gonna have a field day, Hughes muttered, trying for humor but failing. They turned the corner and froze. The hallway ahead was lined with security doors, thick, steel-reinforced panels. Every single one was open. Inside each room, overturned chairs, torn bedding, and splintered furniture lay in chaotic heaps. The smell of copper was stronger here, clinging to the air like a wet cloth pressed over the face. They passed a shattered observation window, glass scattered across the tile. A research logbook lay open on the floor. Morris bent to pick it up. The last entry was only 2 words, scrawled in frantic, uneven handwriting. Don't look. A sudden pop of static made them both flinch. It came from the security hub just ahead. The faint glow of an active monitor spilled into the hall, one of the few still running on backup power. Morris stepped inside first, weapon raised. The main console was cracked, as if struck with tremendous force. Blood had dried along the keyboard. The glowing monitor displayed a paused security feed, a grainy, snow-speckled image of the mess hall. In the center stood a figure, long, pale, its back to the camera. Its arms dangled almost to the floor. Hughes leaned closer to the screen. What the hell is that? Morris didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the faint reflection of the figure in a broken piece of glass lying beside the console. In the reflection, its head was starting to turn. Morris slammed the pause key before the thing's face could turn toward the lens. Don't look at it, he said sharply. Hughes blinked at him. What? I'm serious. Do not look at its face. Just, trust me. The air in the room seemed thicker now, as though even the grainy still image radiated something dangerous. Morris reached for the console controls with deliberate slowness. His glove squeaked against the worn plastic. He toggled through the feeds. Most cameras were dead, their screens black or filled with blizzards of static. A handful showed only empty hallways, lights flickering in the cold. Then one came up that made Hughes swear under his breath. The angle was from inside the mess hall. Time stamp, 12 hours, 14 minutes earlier. The room was full of personnel, researchers, security, even kitchen staff, eating late dinner. Laughter echoed faintly through the tinny speaker. Then the door burst inward. A tall, skeletal figure lurched inside. It moved strangely, almost like it was in pain, long arms twitching, spine bent at an unnatural angle. It wore no clothing, just pale, tight-stretched skin that looked wrong. The room froze. For 2 seconds, there was silence. Then someone screamed. The figure's head jerked up, and for a split second the feed caught its face, just enough for the pixels to warp, distorting the image into something the human brain couldn't comfortably parse. The screaming became shrieking. The figure moved faster than the frame rate could follow, turning into a blur of pale limbs. People scattered, but anyone who'd looked at it didn't make it far. It seized them one by one, tearing through bone and steel like both were paper. The microphone didn't capture words anymore, just raw, animal terror. Morris stopped the playback. The last frame before the feed cut showed the thing crouched over the body of a guard, its hands, those impossibly long, finger-like appendages, plunged deep into the ribcage. Hughes backed away from the console, shaking his head. What the hell is that? Some kind of bioweapon. Morris didn't look up. I've read reports. Code name SCP-096. The shy guy. If you see its face, photo, video, doesn't matter, it hunts you. It won't stop until you're dead. A long silence stretched between them. Outside the wind moaned against the metal siding. Then, faintly, from somewhere in the building, came a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A low, shuddering wail. The sound was faint at first, so faint that Hughes tilted his head, unsure if it was real. Then it grew. It began as a low moan, deep and trembling, like the wind pushing through a hollow shaft. But it didn't stay low. The pitch rose in increments, hitching and breaking, until it became a keening wail that made the walls seem to vibrate. Morris's blood ran cold. Oh, no. What is that? Hughes asked, voice trembling. Morris didn't answer, he was already slamming the console shut, cutting off the monitor's glow. He grabbed Hughes by the arm and dragged him toward the hallway. How long did you look at the screen? Morris demanded. I don't know, a second maybe, why? The scream rose another octave, now impossibly loud, and reverberated down the steel corridors like the whole building was crying out in pain. It's enough, Morris said grimly. It knows. They sprinted down the hall, their boots pounding against the tiles. Somewhere behind them came the faint, rapid patter of feet. Or hands, slapping the floor in uneven bursts. Hughes risked a glance back and wished he hadn't. The far end of the hall was still empty, but a shadow moved unnaturally across the wall, stretched and thin, like something too tall for the space. Command to field team, status. The radio crackled. Morris keyed the mic without slowing. SCP-096 breach confirmed. Evac protocol now. We need immediate. A metallic clang cut him off. It came from somewhere above them, as if something had just slammed into the ventilation ducts. Then came another sound, the hollow rattle of thin metal being crumpled from the inside. Move! Morris barked. The hallway ahead forked, left toward the dormitory wing, right toward the service lift. Morris yanked Hughes to the right. As they reached the lift, a shriek tore through the air, no longer mournful but furious. It was close enough now that they could feel it in their chests. The lift doors opened. They dove inside and slammed the control for the ground floor. But before the doors closed, something pale and impossibly long dropped from the ceiling just beyond the threshold. It landed without a sound. And then it began to crawl. The lift doors sealed shut just as its fingers, if they could still be called fingers, brushed the metal frame. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Morris could hear his own breathing, harsh inside his mask. Hughes leaned against the wall, eyes wide, mouthing something that wasn't quite a prayer. Then came the bang. The whole lift shook violently, as if something had struck the shaft from outside. Another impact followed, closer. Metal groaned. "It's climbing," Morris said flatly. Hughes stared at him. "How the hell?" The lights flickered. The emergency alarm began its dull, pulsing wail. The lift stuttered, jolted, then continued its descent, but slower now, like the cables were straining against some enormous weight. "Command, this is Morris," he said into his mic, "we have visual contact. It's pursuing vertically through the shaft. Advise." The reply was static, then a broken voice, "Get out, line of sight, too late." The lift jolted again, this time upward. "It's pulling us back," Hughes said, his voice cracking. Morris didn't hesitate. He slammed the emergency stop, wrenched open the manual release on the hatch above them, and shoved Hughes toward it. "Go. Now." They climbed into the darkness of the shaft, the smell of rust and oil thick in their throats. Somewhere below, the shriek began again, echoing upward. The sound no longer carried grief, it was pure rage. They reached the next floor up and forced the maintenance door open. Hughes scrambled through first, then turned to help Morris. Just as Morris pulled himself through, something pale flashed in the corner of his vision, an arm, impossibly long, sweeping up the side of the shaft like a spider's leg. They slammed the door shut. It didn't matter. They could still hear it moving, dragging itself sideways through vents and maintenance crawlspaces that shouldn't have been large enough to hold it. Hughes's voice was a whisper now. "You said it won't stop." Morris met his gaze. "Not until you're dead." And from the sound in the walls, SCP-096 was already less than 30 feet away. They burst into a storage wing, shelves stacked with sealed crates and oxygen tanks looming in the flashlight beams. The air was freezing, their breath spilling out in clouds. Somewhere above, ducting rattled with an arrhythmic thump-thump-thump as SCP-096's movements shifted from crawling to something faster. "Keep moving," Morris urged, his voice low but urgent. They weaved between aisles, their footsteps crunching over shattered glass from a light fixture that had exploded recently. Hughes kept glancing upward, flinching at every creak. The next noise was worse than a creak. It was the sound of tearing, thick, resonant, like steel being ripped by bare hands. A panel in the far wall buckled inward. "Go." Morris shoved him toward the far door. They ran, but a deafening clang came from the shelves to their left. An entire row tipped violently, crates spilling and smashing to the ground. Hughes stumbled but didn't fall. He could feel vibrations through the floor now, as if something huge was moving just beneath them. The door ahead was half frozen shut, the locking mechanism stiff from cold. Morris kicked it twice, each impact echoing like a gunshot. On the third, the frame splintered just enough to force it open. They slipped into a narrow lab corridor. Harsh, flickering fluorescent lights painted everything in strobing shadows. In that intermittent illumination, Hughes caught glimpses of movement in the vents overhead, long limbs snaking through, elbows bending wrong, fingers curling like hooks. "Faster!" Morris barked. They passed through another room, this one lined with shattered containment tanks. Whatever had been inside was long gone, and the floor was slick with a freezing layer of water and blood. A torn lab coat hung from a jagged piece of broken glass, its name tag smeared and unreadable. The wail came again, closer than ever. It was so loud in the tight space that Hughes's ears rang. He realized it wasn't just a noise, it was locating him, locking onto him with every sobbing breath. They made it to the armory door. Morris swiped his clearance card, the lock buzzed open. Inside, rows of rifles, shotguns, and experimental Foundation weaponry gleamed under dim emergency lights. Hughes reached for a heavy rifle, but Morris grabbed his wrist. Bullets won't stop it. Don't waste time. Then what? The armory wall caved inward with a thunderous crack, and pale hands came through the hole like claws tearing through paper. The wall split open like cardboard, plaster dust billowing into the room. One of those pale, skeletal arms swept through, fingers digging into the floor, gouging deep furrows into the metal. Out! Now! Morris barked. They bolted through the armory's opposite exit, slamming the door behind them, but the sound of splintering metal followed instantly. There was no time to lock it, SCP-096 was already through. They hit the service corridor that led straight to an exterior maintenance hatch. The keypad was crusted with ice. Morris pounded the release with his fist until the rusted lock disengaged. The hatch swung open, letting in a rush of freezing wind that cut to the bone. Snow swirled in, driven by the storm outside. Hughes had to squint against the whiteout as they stepped into knee-deep drifts. The howl of the wind almost masked the noise of something massive dropping onto the snow behind them. Almost. They ran. The wind whipped against them, and their boots sank deep into the powder, every step a fight. Hughes dared a glance back, regretting it instantly. Through the blowing snow, a tall, distorted silhouette was emerging from the hatch. Its body hunched forward, head bowed, arms hanging unnaturally low. Even blurred by the blizzard, it radiated an almost tangible wrongness. "Keep your head forward," Morris shouted. "Don't." A sob tore through the storm, so loud it felt like the air itself recoiled. Hughes's heart hammered. The sound was different now, less sorrow, more fury, more hunger. They reached the snowmobile bay, a low, reinforced shed half buried under the drifts. Morris ripped the door open, shoved Hughes inside, and yanked down a tarp. Two snowmobiles sat in the gloom, batteries hooked to trickle chargers. "You drive," Morris said, tossing Hughes a helmet. "Don't look back. Just get us to the evac zone." "And you?" Hughes asked. "I'll slow it down," Morris lied. A crash outside made the whole shed shudder. Snow sifted down from the rafters. Hughes's hands shook as he jammed the key into the ignition. The snowmobile roared to life. The shed wall bulged inward, metal screaming under strain. "Go!" Morris shouted. Hughes twisted the throttle and shot out into the white void. The cold air burned his lungs. Behind him, the shed finally gave way with a metallic shriek, and the pale thing followed. Then what? The armory wall caved inward with a thunderous crack, and pale hands came through the hole like claws tearing through paper. The wall split open like cardboard, plaster dust billowing into the room. One of those pale, skeletal arms swept through, fingers digging into the floor, gouging deep furrows into the metal. "Out! Now!" Morris barked. They bolted through the armory's opposite exit, slamming the door behind them, but the sound of splintering metal followed instantly. There was no time to lock it, SCP-096 was already through. They hit the service corridor that led straight to an exterior maintenance hatch. The keypad was crusted with ice. Morris pounded the release with his fist until the rusted lock disengaged. The hatch swung open, letting in a rush of freezing wind that cut to the bone. Snow swirled in, driven by the storm outside. Hughes had to squint against the whiteout as they stepped into knee-deep drifts. The howl of the wind almost masked the noise of something massive dropping onto the snow behind them. Almost. They ran. The wind whipped against them, and their boots sank deep into the powder, every step a fight. Hughes dared a glance back, regretting it instantly. Through the blowing snow, a tall, distorted silhouette was emerging from the hatch. Its body hunched forward, head bowed, arms hanging unnaturally low. Even blurred by the blizzard, it radiated an almost tangible wrongness. "Keep your head forward," Morris shouted. "Don't." A sob tore through the storm, so loud it felt like the air itself recoiled. Hughes's heart hammered. The sound was different now, less sorrow, more fury, more hunger. They reached the snowmobile bay, a low, reinforced shed half buried under the drifts. Morris ripped the door open, shoved Hughes inside, and yanked down a tarp. 2 snowmobiles sat in the gloom, batteries hooked to trickle chargers. "You drive," Morris said, tossing Hughes a helmet. "Don't look back. Just get us to the evac zone." "And you?" Hughes asked. "I'll slow it down," Morris lied. A crash outside made the whole shed shudder. Snow sifted down from the rafters. Hughes's hands shook as he jammed the key into the ignition. The snowmobile roared to life. The shed wall bulged inward, metal screaming under strain. "Go!" Morris shouted. Hughes twisted the throttle and shot out into the white void. The cold air burned his lungs. Behind him, the shed finally gave way with a metallic shriek, and the pale thing followed. The snowmobile tore across the frozen ground, its treads throwing up a rooster tail of powder. Hughes leaned low over the handlebars, squinting through the blizzard. His helmet visor was already frosting over. The evac zone was 2 kilometers west, barely visible as a faint strobe of red light flashing through the storm. Between gusts, Hughes could hear it. The sobbing. The wailing. Closer now, even over the snowmobile's engine. A crackle of radio came through his helmet's comms. "Field Agent Hughes, this is Chopper 2-1. Visual acquired. You are not alone. Repeat, not alone." He didn't bother replying. He knew. Something moved in his peripheral vision, pale and impossibly tall, pacing him just beyond the curtain of white. It wasn't running in a straight line, it loped, each stride covering meters, closing the gap without effort. The red strobe of the evac beacon grew brighter. Through the blur of snow, Hughes saw the shape of the helicopter. Rotors already turning, its landing skids half buried in ice. The side door hung open, a crewman waving frantically. Morris was nowhere in sight. Hughes skidded to a stop beside the chopper, killing the engine. He ripped off his helmet and sprinted toward the open door. The wind from the rotors whipped the snow into a frenzy, but through it, he saw movement behind him, white skin against white storm. A deafening bang erupted as something slammed into the snowmobile he'd just abandoned, flipping it end over end. Hughes didn't look, he threw himself into the cabin, hands grabbing at the crewman's harness. "Go! Go!" Hughes screamed. The pilot didn't need telling twice. The chopper lurched upward, skids clearing the snow by a meter, then 2. Hughes collapsed against the cabin wall, gasping, trying to believe he'd made it. Then he saw the expression on the crewman's face, eyes wide, mouth opening slowly. Hughes followed his gaze downward. Through the open door, a pale figure stood in the snow, head bowed, shoulders heaving. It began to scream. The sound hit Hughes like a physical force, rattling the frame of the helicopter. And then, impossibly, SCP-096 jumped. Its hands slammed into the skid, and the whole aircraft jerked violently. The helicopter bucked like a living thing, rotors screaming as the pilot fought to keep control. Hughes was slammed against the cabin wall, pain jolting up his side. The crewman beside him grabbed for his rifle, but Morris's warning echoed in Hughes's head, "Bullets won't stop it." SCP-096's head stayed bowed even as it hung from the skid, its body swaying violently in the rotor wash. The scream poured from it, relentless, the pitch so high Hughes thought his eardrums would burst. The pilot shouted over the noise, "I can't shake it, weight's killing our lift." Another violent lurch sent Hughes sliding toward the open door. He caught the edge just in time, fingers numb in the freezing air. The crewman fired anyway, 3 sharp cracks into the storm. The rounds punched into pale flesh, but SCP-096 didn't even flinch. Its grip only tightened. Then, with a sudden whip of its elongated arms, it swung upward, its head still downcast, and planted both feet against the helicopter's fuselage. Metal buckled inward with a sickening crunch. The pilot cursed, wrestling the controls. "We're going down." Hughes grabbed the crewman and braced as the chopper spun sideways. Through the blur of motion and snow, Hughes caught a glimpse of the ground, black ice and jagged rock rushing up to meet them. Impact. The world became noise and shattering glass. Hughes felt himself torn from the cabin, weightless for a moment before slamming into the snow hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. He lay there, dazed, the cold already seeping into his bones. Somewhere nearby, the wrecked helicopter hissed and popped as metal cooled in the snow. The rotors were twisted and motionless. The crewman lay crumpled, unmoving. The pilot. Hughes didn't see the pilot. But he saw it. SCP-096 stood in the wreckage, unmoving, its shoulders rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. Then, with terrifying calm, it began walking toward him. Over the radio, buried in static, a distant voice broke through. "Containment team to all units. Visual confirmed. Target is active. Engage Protocol Delta 7. All field agents, clear the AO. Now." The voice was calm. Hughes knew what that meant. The Foundation wasn't coming to rescue him. They were coming to bury the whole site. Static filled the comms as Hughes fumbled with the microphone, voice ragged and barely above a whisper. "This is Agent Hughes. Outpost Theta 19 compromised. SCP-096 active." The snow crackled underfoot, mingling with distant explosions. The faint wail of the creature's sobbing echoed like a death knell through the icy wasteland. "Containment breached, do not look at it. If you hear this, run. Don't stop. It hunts until it finds you." The voice faltered, breath hitching painfully. "Protocol Delta 7 initiated, evac failed, requesting backup. If anyone is out there, please hurry." A sudden sharp noise, like metal scraping bone, interrupted the broadcast. Hughes gasped, then silence. The feed remained open, a dull hiss the only sound as the storm swallowed the last traces of life. After the transmission cut, the facility was sealed, buried beneath layers of ice and snow, its secrets entombed. But somewhere, far beyond the frozen wasteland, a new image had surfaced, an unmarked photograph found by an unknowing scavenger, and in its blurry pixels, the faintest hint of a pale, twisted face. And with that glimpse, the hunt begins again.